Hey everyone, JM here at Disciple Dojo, and I just wanted to jump on. This is not going to be a study Bible review, but this month has been, if you followed on Instagram, at JamesMichael7, has been Judaism January. So the last study Bible that we reviewed was the Jewish Study Bible by Oxford. I'm currently reading through the Annotated Jewish Apocrypha and the Annotated Jewish New Testament, and I hope to do a review video about those volumes in the future. But there's also another resource that I wanted to share with you guys because I think it might be helpful, especially for those who are unfamiliar with Judaism, who are, like myself, come from a Christian background, or non-religious Jews who've never been practicing and want to know a little bit more about your own faith tradition. This little volume by Abraham Cohen, Every Man's Talmud, is great. It was published back in 1949, and it has a foreword by Jacob Neusner. But the Everyman's Talmud, what it does is it takes the writings of the Talmud, which are voluminous. I don't even know if that's the right word, but they're massive. I mean, look at the Talmud. It takes up an entire shelf in and of itself. And it can be really, really difficult. There's a reason faithful Jews spend literally their entire lives just studying the Talmud for decades and decades. It's a massive library of Jewish writings and discussions and debates and arguments among rabbis through the centuries. It's intimidating. So Every Man's Talmud, what this does is it basically is the closest thing, at least that I've seen. And I am not an expert in Judaism. I'm learning. That's part of the fun of Judaism January, is I'm getting to do a deep dive into various traditions of Judaism. But it's the closest thing that I have seen to what those of us who are Christians would call a systematic theology. In other words, what Cohen does is he goes through and he takes these different areas of theological inquiry and he presents a basic introductory summary of what you're going to find about those topics in the Talmud. So that sounds really abstract. Let me show you what I mean. Chapter 1, the doctrine of God. So there's going to be sections on God's existence, his unity, his incorporeality, his omnipresence, his omnipotence, his omniscience, his eternity, justice and mercy, his fatherhood, holiness and perfection, and the ineffable name. Now, these are things that you would find in a Christian systematic theology. You pick up Calvin's Institutes, or maybe Stan Grinz's Theology for the Community of God, Millard Erickson's Christian Theology, Thomas Oden's 3-volume systematic theology. And what you'll see are Christian theologians taking those same concepts, those theological, philosophical concepts, and then presenting chapters on what does the Bible say about those things. Well, Cohen does that, but he does it with the Talmud because for various streams of Judaism, it's not just what Scripture teaches that is authoritative, although of course they would say that's the ultimate authority. But in addition to the written Scripture, you also have the oral. So you have the written Torah, and then you have the oral Torah, the traditions of the rabbis that were verbally passed on through the centuries. As different rabbinic schools debated and discussed, argued and reasoned, disagreed with each other. I mean, that's what the Talmud is, thousands and thousands and thousands of pages documenting these disagreements. But that entire process, the agreeing, the disagreeing, the arguing, the reasoning out based on Scripture, and even minute little word choices that are made in the Hebrew text, all of that goes into developing Jewish theology. So let me just share with you some of the other chapter headings so you'll see what topics Cohen presents here and kind of distills from the Talmudic writings. Chapter 2, God and the Universe. Chapter 3, the Doctrine of Man. Chapter 4, Revelation. Chapter 5, Domestic Life. Chapter 6, Social Life. Chapter 7, the Moral Life. Chapter 8, the Physical Life. Chapter 9, Folklore. Chapter 10, Jurisprudence. And that chapter is actually broken into 2 sections. The criminal law, civil and criminal procedure, and then civil law. Because Judaism has always been a religion built around the idea that God gives laws to his people. And so from the earliest days of Israel's existence as a nation, God gave them covenant laws. So the ability to interpret and then to live out that law in all the various settings that Jews throughout the centuries have found themselves in, that is a huge part of Jewish theology. And that's where a lot of rabbinic debates would center around. In the New Testament, Jesus even enters into some of those debates when he's asked about things like his teaching on divorce and remarriage. He is being pulled into a debate among 2 very well-known rabbinic schools in the first century, the school of Hillel and the school of Shammai. If you're interested in how Jesus handles that discussion, check out the video here in our series To Know and Be Known, Forming a Thoughtful Christian Sexual Ethic. And in the episode on Jesus, Moses, marriage, and divorce, we actually look at that passage in more detail and that rabbinic discussion that was taking place that Jesus was being drawn into. And then we come to the final chapter, chapter 11, the hereafter, having to do with the world to come, with life after death, the last judgment, all of those things. So this is a really cool resource. Now, I've had this on my shelf. No joke. I've probably had this on my shelf for almost 20 years. And I'm just now getting around to actually really reading it. I think I've skimmed it a few times when I've looked up a resource or a reference or something. I'm not through it. I'm maybe a third of the way, a quarter of the way through it. But I really enjoy this because what Cohen is doing is he is giving an entry into the Talmud. If I sat down and tried to read the Talmud right now, man, that would be rough. And I'm fairly well educated and my Hebrew is but even I would be overwhelmed. And so the average Dojo viewer, of course, you would probably just look at that and go, yeah, right. Who has time to read all that? Now, I'm not Jewish. I don't come from any stream of Judaism, so I cannot critique this. I can't say if this is good or not in terms of how it faithfully reflects whatever type of Judaism one belongs to. So if you're Orthodox and you disagree, or if you're Reformed and you disagree, or if you're conservative and you disagree, this video is not to enter into an inter-Jewish discussion or debate. This video is meant to introduce those of you Disciple Dojo viewers who come from outside of a Jewish background and you just want to know more about it. Because at the end of the day, we should all want to know more about the religions of our friends and neighbors. We should want to know about Judaism from actual Jews. We should want to know about Islam from actual Muslims. We should want to know about Hinduism from actual Hindus. Because if we don't do that, what we will end up with is a caricature of a faith that we don't agree with. It's very easy for Christians, especially preachers and teachers, very easy to caricature a belief in a sermon or writing a blog post or even writing a book. It's very easy to caricature another faith that we don't share. And even among Christians, when we enter into like inter-theological debates, it's very easy to caricature a belief that we don't agree with. And so we need to be aware of that. I'll give you an example. Here at the Dojo, we have 2 videos where I talk about Calvinism. Calvinism is a very divisive subject among Christians. And so what I try to do in those presentations, which were given at a college campus ministry years ago, is I try to present Calvinism, which is a view I do not hold. I mean, those of you who watch the channel, I'm not from the Calvinist Reformed tradition, but I try to present it as my professors who were committed Calvinists presented it to me in the best light possible to explain the reasoning and the rationale for why Calvinists come to the conclusions that they come to based on their reading of Scripture. And then in the second video, I offer what I think makes a little more sense of what we find in Scripture when it comes to the doctrines that are incorporated into what we call Calvinism. Well, that's the value I see in reading a work like Cohen's, because he is actually Jewish. And Neusner, in his introduction, he even notes areas where he disagrees with Cohen, even though he has tremendous respect for him. And he wrote the foreword to this work, and he commends this work to readers, because that's what having good, robust theological discussion is all about. Being willing to enter into and see the best in another position, whether it's a theological position within your own faith, or whether it's a related faith, such as the various Abrahamic religions, or whether it's an entirely different faith altogether. We gain a lot when we listen to the best voices and when we really do try to understand not just what other people believe, but how they got there, why they believe it. And I've really appreciated that about Cohen's work, is it's showing me, I've always known that my Jewish friends believed certain things, but I haven't always known why. I haven't always known where it comes from. And so being able to see the rabbis that are quoted or the passages from the Talmud that touch on this particular topic, then I can go in and do a deeper dive. And so I'll give you an example. Somebody asked a question in a Facebook group that I'm part of that has to do with creationism and Genesis and things like that. And they asked a question about the Hebrew text and specifically about this word in Hebrew and if it was possible to break this word down to its two separate parts. Now, I answered and I said, I don't know how firm that is grammatically. I don't think Hebrew as a language works that way. I could be wrong, but I would be a little skeptical if somebody were making this claim. And so, the person responded, and I just said, if you find anything that makes this argument, I'd like to see it, because I'm not aware of it. So that was weeks ago. Well, just this week, I'm reading through a chapter in Every Man's Talmud, and I come across a passage that has to do with that exact verse, who made the same argument that this person in this group was asking if this is a possible argument. He divided the Hebrew word into those two parts and suggested it. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I was just talking about this with someone. So the citation from the Talmud was in the chapter, and then I was able to jump on a great website that a Jewish friend of mine showed me where you can pretty much look up any rabbinic writing. And I typed in the reference to this particular passage from the Talmud, and then I was able to go through and read and follow the discussion. I would never have come across that passage in the Talmud on my own, but this gave me a good entry into that. And so then I was able to share the passage. I was able to copy and paste it, share it with this fellow on Facebook and say, hey, here's actually a medieval rabbi who's making that same argument. You can't say it's grammatically certain, but at least somebody else has noticed it and made that point in history. So that's just one example of a way that this has been useful for me specifically this week. And so I wanted to make this video just to tell anybody out there, you're interested in learning about Judaism, rabbinic beliefs, what does the Talmud teach on all of these different topics? You're not going to get anything exhaustive. This is not an exhaustive work. You can see this is a very small volume. The Talmud would fill one of these shelves behind me. But what you are going to get is an entry point into the rabbinic writings. And I think that's a great thing to know about. So I do commend this to you, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Christian, whether you're Muslim, whether you're no faith at all, and you just want to know more about Jewish belief, specifically Talmudic rabbinic thought, not necessarily biblical interpretation, but the whole other layer that goes into Jewish theology that comes from the rabbis. So check it out if you have this, if you've used it. If you are Jewish and you have this and have used it and you have thoughts on it, I'd love to hear them. Again, this is an outsider's perspective, and I recognize that. I'm not trying to get out of my lane. Just wanted to share this resource with viewers. So there you go. As always, thanks for watching Disciple Dojo. If you find this channel helpful, we'd love for you to subscribe, click the notifications icon, help us to continue to grow here on YouTube. And we would like to invite you to become a Disciple Dojo donor if you aren't already. If you find value in what we do, we don't have a Patreon, we don't have a rich endowment, we don't have a bunch of employees, a big infrastructure. We're a very small nonprofit focused on equipping, engaging, and empowering God's people. And this YouTube channel is one of the main ways that we do that. We have other things that Disciple Dojo does as a ministry. But if you find this helpful and you want to support us and help us keep going, we really could use your financial support on a monthly basis. I'll put a link in the description below for how you can do that. Look into it, pray about it, see if it's something you're interested in. And I'll also put a link on where you can get a copy of Cohen's Every Man's Talmud. That's all for now. Thanks for watching. Take care.